Hi, I'm Brian from mypopflies.com and welcome. We're continuing our introductory video series. In this one I'm going to talk about human factors and why we need to consider those when we're flying. This video is only an introduction to those human factors, and to continue on with the ground school with me, we'll cover those in greater detail in a later lesson. But right now we're just taking an introductory look at aeronautical decision making and risk management, and in the next video we'll address aviation physiology and specifically how drugs and alcohol and performance affect our fitness for flight. So if you haven't already, go watch the other video on Introduction to Aviation, and there will be a link to it in the description below here. And combine this video and then the next one on aviation physiology, and we'll have completed the first ground lesson in the ground school curriculum. So between these three videos there's a lot of information as we talk about what it takes to become a pilot. At the end of this first set of video lessons, you'll have a good idea of what it takes to become a pilot, the decision and risk management tools at your disposal, as well as a basic understanding of aviation physiology. So when we talk about human factors, we got to consider that there's more to pilot training than just acquiring technical knowledge and gaining proficiency in aircraft control. We need to understand how our mind and body function when we fly. That is just as important as knowing the operation of the airplane systems and the equipment. And we're going to look into the foundation of the human factors in aviation, and we'll expand on this introductory foundation later on. So we're going to focus primarily on single pilot resource management. We're all learning in our training. Our goal is to learn to fly a small single engine training aircraft, and all of our training is leading up to the certificate to allow us to fly as a private pilot, to fly on our own solo. So it only kind of makes sense that we look at resource management from a single pilot perspective. These concepts are an adaptation of the crew resource management concepts that we will look at in depth later on. So the purpose of single pilot resource management is to improve safety and reduce the number of accidents caused by pilot error. That's the whole vision behind the FAA and the way that they want this material presented. And to do that, we're going to teach you about human limitations and how to maximize your performance when piloting a small single-engine aircraft. So, single pilot resource management, or SRM, it's the art of managing all the onboard and outside resources available to you as a pilot before, during, and after the flight to help ensure a safe and successful outcome. So incorporating single pilot resource management into general aviation pilot training is an important step forward in aviation security, or aviation safety. We'll learn to gather information, analyze it, and make sound decisions on how we conduct the flight. So let's look at some of the tools we have available to do this single pilot resource management stuff. One of the tools that we have, and we're getting ready to dive into a boatload of acronyms and mnemonics. So, let's keep track of these. If you need to, hit pause, rewind to catch them all. But one of the tools, the first tool we're going to look at, is the 5P approach. The 5P approach is ultimately the greatest. To get the greatest benefit from single pilot resource management, we need a practical framework to apply SRM to our day-to-day flying. And the approach that we're teaching here is the regular evaluation of the 5 Ps. The 5 Ps are plan, plane, pilot, passenger, and programming. So hit pause there, write those down. Okay, we're back. As a part of the bigger ground school that I'm putting together, I'm going to have a downloadable kneeboard template that has these 5 Ps on it, so you don't have to memorize them, but you will have the checklist available to go through this when necessary. And it'll have these 5 Ps on it, as well as some other decision-making methodologies pertinent to single-pilot aviation operations. So let's discuss what the 5 Ps are. First, the plan. So the plan includes the plan. It's the elements of the cross-country, all your cross-country planning, your weather, your route, how much fuel you need. Do you have all your current publications? Have you looked at runway distances and distance available? All of this is updated on a regular basis and regular intervals throughout the flight. And keep in mind that the plan can change at any time. So even the best plan never survives first contact with the enemy. So we're going to evaluate the plan at regular intervals throughout our flight. So the plane is the next P, the plane. The plane includes the airframe, the systems, all the equipment, including the avionics. You should be proficient in the use of all the installed equipment, as well as familiar with the aircraft and the equipment's performance characteristics and limitations. Throughout the flight, you should monitor the aircraft systems and instruments to detect any anomalies as early as possible. So the third P is the pilot. And we're getting ready to throw another acronym at you here, but you need to keep track and pass the traditional I am safe checklist. This is part of the 5P process that helps identify and mitigate physiological hazards at all stages of flight with the pilot. An in-depth review of I am safe, as well as a trifold kneeboard edition, will be available later in the ground school lessons. So the next P is passengers. So we're evaluating as a single pilot, but we're also evaluating our ability to carry passengers with us as well. So passengers can be a great help in performing tasks. They can help us watch for traffic, hold charts as necessary, but they can also be a liability when we fly. Physiological discomfort, they're getting nauseous from turbulence. Anxiety because they're not real comfortable flying in the smaller aircraft, or their desire to reach the destination. They get their itis. That can create a potentially dangerous distraction with the passengers. And then the last P is the programming. So this takes into account panel-mounted and handheld equipment. Today's electronic instruments and their displays, as well as the moving maps and autopilots, that can all do a lot to reduce your pilot workload and increase your situational awareness. However, the task of programming and operating both the installed panel-mounted as well as the handheld equipment can create serious distractions to you as the pilot. So you need to have a good understanding of how your equipment works to be able to program it, know what their limitations are, and do this before takeoff. En route, there could be some programming of GPS, your GPS approach, gathering frequencies for your arrival, airport, and such. So part of this programming is knowing when and where to do that programming to get that information, as well as have in mind where you should not be playing with the knobs on it to get the information that you should stay ahead of the airplane and have that in plenty of time. So the 5P process, it's a technique of aeronautical decision making, or ADM. And ADM as a concept is a thought-out process designed to give consistent and quality results while determining the best course of action for any given situation. So that means the decision process doesn't end. It begins during flight planning, and it doesn't stop until you have your airplane in the hangar in the evening after a great day of flying. So the decision process is how ADM works. When we look at the ADM process from a human factor standpoint, we need to understand that there are attitudes that are hazardous to safe flight. These are attitudes of how we react to different situations. Once we're aware of these attitudes, we can learn techniques to counter them. Your risk assessment skills as you go through training will improve and will get better, and you will see all of this. And risk assessment's an ongoing process, so even after you get your license, you will continue to build on what you're learning here. We'll go over the 5 hazardous attitudes, and then later in a deeper lesson we will talk about some of the mitigating factors for these. So the first of the 5 hazardous attitudes that I want to talk about are anti-authority. This attitude is found in people who they don't like people telling them what to do. The anti-authority types typically regard rules and regulations and procedures as silly and unnecessary. So that's anti-authority. The impulsivity types, these feel like they have to do something right, wrong, or indifferent. They have to do something, they have to do it right now. They don't really stop to think about the consequences, about what they're about to do. They usually don't take the time to select the best alternative, and they do the first thing that pops into their mind. So invulnerability is the third type of personality that we need to talk about, and many people feel the invulnerable types feel that accidents happen, but they happen to others, that it won't happen to them. They know anyone can be affected, but they never really feel that they'll ever be personally involved. So with this attitude, you're more likely to take chances and increase your risk when you fly. So the fourth attitude out of 5 is macho. So pilots are always trying to prove that they're better than everyone else and they think they can do it. So it's the I'll show them, or hey y'all watch this. So pilots with this type of attitude, they try to prove themselves by taking risks, unnecessary risks, to impress others. And keep in mind, it's not just limited to guys. It's not a testosterone thing. That women are equally as susceptible to the macho pattern of thought. So, and the final one is resignation. So people who think, what's the use? How can I make this better? How can I change things? This is the resignation type. When things are going well, they typically attribute it to good luck, and when things are going badly, hey, somebody's out to get me, or it may just be bad luck, and that's the resignation attitude. And again, we'll talk about mitigating factors in a future lesson on these. So, as you assess the risk using all these different tools, there's yet another checklist to use, okay? You got the 3P process. The 3P process helps us exercise good aeronautical decision making for developing risk assessment skills. The 3 P's are perceive, process, and perform. So we perceive the hazards, we process those perceptions to evaluate the level of risk, and then we perform risk management on it. So when we perceive, the goal is to identify the hazards, which are events, objects, or circumstances that could contribute to an undesirable event. You need to consider hazards associated with, here comes another one, PAVE, pilot, aircraft, environment, and external pressures. We'll dig into PAVE deeply in a later lesson, so you have to stick with us on that one. The next P, process. This is where we ask questions to determine what can hurt us. In short, do we have care, more acronyms, about these hazards? And care is consequences. What are the consequences? What are the alternatives? What is the reality of the situation facing me? And what kind of external pressures may affect my thinking? So, and finally, we want to perform. This is where we change the situation in our favor. Our objective is to make sure the hazard is unable to hurt us, and we make changes, and then we go back through the process to see if those changes made the effect that we wanted. So, aeronautical decision making, this is kind of a cursory look at it. Again, we'll go deeper in a future lesson, but if you want to read more about it, check out Advisory Circular 60-22. That gives you a way deeper understanding of the process, and it goes way beyond the introductory level of this lesson. So, to touch a little bit on the risk management piece, aviation risk management, that's a vital part of being a well-rounded pilot. Safety mindset, this works best every time you fly if you have a safety mindset. So although all the components are important, perhaps the most vital of them all is understanding the importance of risk management. We've got a textbook definition. Risk management is a decision-making process that lies on situational awareness, problem recognition, and good judgment. And that all comes together to reduce risks associated with each flight. So sound risk management is vital to a successful and safe flight. It's important to create a mindset of proactivity. We want to take action before the hazard becomes a hazard we can't do anything about. Proactive hazard management can help mitigate the risk from growing or even coming up to be altogether. So there's three main components to risk management, all of which we'll discuss in detail in the future lesson. Hazard recognition, hazard analysis, and eliminating the hazard. And we'll get into depth of those in a future lesson. So one hazard that we need to discuss, and it's important enough that it has its own little box that the FAA has put it in, and that's controlled flight into terrain, or CFIT. This is a subject critical enough that it warrants its own section of discussion here. And what it is this occurs when an airworthy aircraft under complete control of the pilot is inadvertently flown into terrain, water, or an obstacle such as an antenna or a tower or such. The pilot is generally unaware of this danger until it's too late because they're busy looking at other things. They're tuning their radios, they're programming their GPS. Something else is going on that has consumed their attention, and they don't even see it coming. Most of these accidents occur in the approach and landing phase, and they're often associated with non-precision approaches for those that are going to go on and get their instrument rating later on. So, a couple of typical scenarios where this could happen. You got the pilot induced version. You're out flying, weather conditions are deteriorating, they're getting worse than forecast, and you're trying to maintain visual contact with the ground. So you either got into the clouds and you're trying to get down to where you can see the ground, or you're trying to stay below the clouds, and you get down very low and something happens, you're below a safe altitude and you strike the ground, or an antenna or something sticking up that you didn't see. There's also an ATC possible induced situation, and in this scenario the controller gives us a intermediate heading towards an ILS localizer. We're being radar vectored to the initial approach. Controller got distracted and got busy, and they failed to give us the turn on course inbound for the ILS approach, and they kind of forgot about us, and we ran into something on the far side of it before we could figure out something was afoot. So with all the automation, this also provides a hazard of its own. You know, at the end of the day, automation is a great thing, and you think it'd make it safe, make us all safer in the air, but I mean, that was the intent, to aid safety and make us safer aircraft and safer pilots. However, the automation seems to have the tendency to allow us to extend our capabilities with very little impact on safety. It really hasn't changed a whole lot. It just gives us the opportunity to get deeper in trouble before we realize it. So make sure that you know your equipment and how to use it before you rely on it. So that's where we're going to wrap up this video, and we'll get into the aviation physiology in the next one. But we've talked about risk management, we've talked about hazardous attitudes, and we've talked about several acronyms to help us process risk, help us find a good course of action, and how to make the changes to act on those decisions, and then how to loop through it and reevaluate as we go through the decision making and the risk management cycles. So stick with me. Go back and watch the first one if you haven't. Rewatch this one to get all the acronyms, and catch up on the third one where we talk about aviation physiology, and that should give us all of the information that you need for your very first ground lesson. So if you like this, share it, hit subscribe down below so your other aviation friends who are wanting to learn as well can jump in on this, and feel free to share and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video here shortly. Thank you.